A running theme at this week's Democratic National Convention is that President Biden and the border czar, Kamala Harris, that somehow their policies on the southern border are working. In fact, just last Friday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a press release claiming that illegal border crossings were down by 34% from June to July. And that somehow all this was the result of a proclamation from President Biden back in June. But when you look in an unbiased manner, when you look at the real data, it shows that the situation is far, far worse than the Biden administration's cherry-picked numbers would somehow suggest. Well, joining me now to help unpack this and break it down is Chad Wolf. I know of no one who is better equipped to bring us the truth on this whole situation. He is the former acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security during the Trump administration. He's now the chairman for the Center for Homeland Security and Immigration at the America First Policy Institute. Chad, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so we have here the Biden administration somehow crowing, if you will, about their latest border numbers. In fact, let me just hit a clip. Let me put this up and get your reaction to it. This is President Biden from last night at the convention.
I had to take executive action. The result of the executive action I took, border encounters have dropped over 50%. In fact, there are fewer border crossings today than when Donald Trump left office.
Really, really. All right. What does the data really show?
Yeah. Well, it's not what President Biden says, it's what he doesn't say. And what he doesn't say is all the other information that I think most Americans really need to know. But let me go back. You know, under President Trump and under President Obama and President Bush and previous administrations, you would look at the number of border apprehensions, illegal aliens crossing the border, apprehended by Border Patrol, to get a pretty good understanding of what is the situation along that border, and is it high, is it low, or is it somewhere in between? That all changed with the Biden administration, because what they did is they implemented an unlawful parole program where they actually fly individuals from 4 different countries, over about 30,000 a month, into the country. So they never come across that border, right? But they're inadmissible aliens nevertheless, as well as a CBP-1 app that allows them to push illegal aliens through ports of entry. So again, they're not apprehended by Border Patrol. So in the Biden administration, you actually have to look at 3 different data sets to understand, to get a full grasp of the situation along that border. And what President Biden just mentioned in the clip that you showed is only one data set. And he's given you the lowest data set he has to show that somehow the numbers have decreased. But if you look at everything that's going on and all the changes that they have made, that 56,000 number that he may have mentioned is actually 170,000 for the month of July. That is an astronomically high number. The border crisis remains at a historic level along that border, despite what the president and the vice president want you to believe.
Wow. Yeah, you know, when you look at all 3 data points, that's a whole different story than just looking at one. And the one that he mentioned happened to be the lowest of the 3, which means we have serious problems on the other data points, like you mentioned, them flying in illegal aliens. I mean, just bypass the border altogether. Like, what kind of numbers of people are we looking at with that?
Yeah, well, we've never had that before, right? This is a new program under the Biden administration. It's why you've never had to count it before, because it's never been in existence. And so these are individuals that are flown in from Haiti, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, not the best countries in the world to be taking individuals in from. And they're flown in at about 30,000 a month. They're flown into the country into about 20 different airports across our country, and then, of course, released into American communities. Or the number of individuals coming in through ports of entry through that CBP-1 app. In July alone, it was over 47,000 of them. These are individuals that would have showed up along that border, would have been counted in those Border Patrol numbers that would have been much higher. I think the reality is here, you know, the Biden administration can look at any numbers they want, and they can cherry pick 1 month over the course of almost 3.5 years. But what the data shows is that after 3.5 years of the Biden-Harris administration, upwards of 9 to 10 million individuals have crossed that border illegally. And if you look at all 4 years of the Trump administration, it was around 2 million. And I think that tells you everything that you need to know.
Wow. Yeah, and I've seen numbers as high, excuse me, as high as 12.5 million during the 3+ years of the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And I've also seen somewhere in the ballpark of just June, July, what we're talking about 170,000 when you add up all that you're talking about. I mean, it is so misleading, intentionally misleading to the American people to falsify what is really happening on our borders, and those who are coming in, people that we know nothing about, their background. We do know that crime is going up in the country. So all people have to do is look at it. I've been on the border with you several times. It is shameful. It's frightening. I wish every single person in the country could take a trip to the border and see firsthand what is actually happening. So this is intentional deception. Is that correct?
It is. It's this game that they've played now for 3.5 years, which is trying to convince the American people that nothing's going on that border, right? For 2 years, 2.5, I would say, they refused to call it a crisis. Remember? They kept saying it's just a challenge. It's not a crisis. Well, somehow at the beginning of this year, in an election year, President Biden all of a sudden started calling it a crisis, right? Because he knew what the rest of the American people know, that it's a crisis and that he needed to start to campaign on it. And then they started taking action. So, look, this has been the mantra of this administration. Let's ignore what's going on in the border. Let's try to gaslight and convince the American people they're not seeing what they're actually seeing with their own eyes. And then at the end of that, then let's try to blame Republicans that it's somehow their fault, which is what they're doing here. And so they've had a record of not being transparent with the American people for some time.
Yeah, and they always seem to be good at deflecting and passing the blame on Republicans, and we've got to learn how to counter that. Chad, I'd love for you to stick over, if you can, for a few more moments. I've got some more questions for you on the other side of the break. Chad, thanks so much for sticking around. Really appreciate it.
Happy to do it.
All right, so let's discuss now, if we can, the Harris campaign's position on border security and immigration. Some of those things were just revealed yesterday. So let's walk through what she's hoping to do in a Harris-Walz administration. What are some of the highlights?
It's really interesting because obviously Vice President Harris hasn't really talked much since assuming, the nominee, at least unofficially. And so this is really the first time. And so this is the platform on immigration, part of the platform that they rolled out there in Chicago this week. And so you get a sense of what 4 years under Kamala Harris would look like. And throughout that platform, they talk about a bill and they talk about legislation that they're very proud of and that they support. It's called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. And so as we unravel and actually look at what's in that bill, it is very radical. It's so radical that that bill did not even get a vote in Congress when controlled by Democrats, all three branches. It was so radical they couldn't even vote on it. But yet that is what Kamala Harris is saying is her policy is along that border. So what does that mean? Well, it means a path to citizenship for almost the entire illegal alien population in the U.S. It's probably over 15 million individuals. And that includes individuals that were removed or deported under President Trump. They would actually bring them back into the country at taxpayer expense. Why and for what reason, they don't say. You can only imagine. And that's just a couple of different things that this bill does that is so far out of the mainstream that, again, even Democrats, for the most part, wouldn't vote on it.
What about some of those who have committed crimes here? Those who are here now who have felony records, are they safe, or will they be deported?
Well, under this bill, should it get passed and what she's advocating for, she makes it more difficult, almost impossible to remove individuals that have a felony. So these are illegal aliens that have a felony. It makes it very difficult to remove. They actually say in the bill it has to be an aggravated felony. So it's not enough that you maybe committed burglary. You've got to do it with a weapon, right? It's got to be an aggravated crime of some sort. It's just crazy. It also reduces or eliminates the bars, what we call bars to reentry. So if an illegal alien gets caught and removed, they're prohibited from coming back into the country for 3 or 10 years. It removes that completely. There is no consequence to their illegal behavior. It allows them to come right back in almost immediately.
Wow. So what about things like, say, Social Security numbers, those type of things? What happens on that front?
Well, it directs the commissioner of the Social Security Administration to issue every illegal alien a Social Security number, right? Which makes it far more easier to get a driver's license and to be registered in that state's voter registration file as well. So in some respects, obviously, this makes it a lot easier to vote. And in many states, it's illegal for an illegal alien to vote in certainly a local election. And then we know it's against federal law to vote in a federal election as well. But what you're doing here is you're facilitating that and you're making it easier for those illegal aliens to do just that.
Yeah, that's really why I brought that question up. I mean, here we are entering at just 80 days or whatever we are from an election. And here we're going to at least have a policy to legalize some 15 million people who are here illegally, including criminals, give them Social Security numbers, making it much easier for them to register to vote. And boom. I mean, it's just like all of this, Chad, just seems so. Well, it is. It's just wrong. It is not the way things ought to be at all. So where's all this going to go?
I think it's interesting, right? Because they unveil this platform that has all this in there. We're still in the middle of a very dire situation along that border and a crisis. And there's very little, almost nothing in this platform that actually addresses the crisis, that actually addresses this, hundreds of thousands and millions of individuals coming into the country that are being released into the country. You would think that there would be some strong enforcement measures that she would be for that, but it actually doesn't. It doesn't appear that way because there's not much there in way of enforcement.
So instead, I mean, as we talked about earlier in the program, they just deflect and blame Republicans. In this case, I know there's an attempt to blame President Trump for killing the Senate's comprehensive border security bill, which was horrible. But again, they point the direction that he was the problem.
Well, they do that. Look, that Senate bill, as you indicated, was not good. It had bipartisan opposition. Both Republicans and Democrats alike were against that bill. So I think that's important, right? Don't let the press and any others tell you it was only President Trump killed it. I took a look at it. It was not workable. Other members of Congress took a look at it and bipartisan opposition to that bill. But I can tell you what, again, the vice president has been against is H.R. 2, which is a very strong border security bill. And what she is for, evidently, because they just put it out this week, is this radical bill that does all these different things that allow more and more individuals to come in, easier to come into the country, and makes it more difficult to remove them. And I just think that is the wrong policy approach for these times.
Absolutely. Chad Wolf from the America First Policy Institute. Wow, what an honor to have you. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for the incredible work you have done and you continue to do on this front. God bless you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you.